We're going to start with Shlomit Wygoda Cohen's from Minerva-Gentner Haifa's lecture.
Okay, so thank you for all of you who are here and online, and thanks David who's not here for organizing and for inviting me and for all the talks so far. So yes, here the title of my talk is Rethinking the Layered Structure Model of Reality, Lessons from Moral Non-Naturalism. Let me just set up a timer so that I can. So. Okay, so roughly my claim in this talk is going to be that moral non-naturalism is at odds with three widespread assumptions about the metaphysical bedrock, but that's still very vague. I assume I have to explain what I mean by moral non-naturalism, I have to explain what I mean by the metaphysical bedrock, and I have to say which three assumptions I'm referring to. So the plan is to first start with, in the introduction, I'll explain what I mean by metaphysical bedrock and what I mean by moral non-naturalism. Then I'll go through the three assumptions. I'll present their intuitive appeal and why I think they're at odds with moral non-naturalism. Each of them is differently at odds with moral non-naturalism. And then I'll conclude. Okay, so starting with presenting the layered structure model and metaphysical bedrock. So a very common view in metaphysics, which goes back all the way at least to Aristotle, is a layered structure model. And according to this model, reality is divided into a series of stratified levels, hierarchically structured, such that the facts in each level hold in virtue of the facts in the level below it, or are built by them, or whatever term you prefer to use. Now, by facts, I don't mean anything that's necessarily very metaphysically heavy. I just mean the worldly correlates of true propositions. And I think a useful analogy here is that of time. So just like we have, say, diachronically structured horizontal layered structure of time moving forward, we have this, what's the word? The horizontal, and there's this vertical layered structure that goes from the more fundamental to the less fundamental. So that's the general picture, but what does it take for something to be at a lower or higher level in this model? So first, there's a simple case where some fact holds in virtue of another fact. Then the second fact is more fundamental than the first. So if A holds in virtue of B, then B is more fundamental than A. That's the simple case. And now also something very plausible is that even if grounding is intransitive, the more fundamental than relation is transitive. So if A is more fundamental than B in that way, and B is more fundamental than C in that way, then we have the transitivity of more fundamental than. But an interesting feature of relative fundamentality is that it sometimes makes sense to talk about relative fundamentality across grounding chains. So here are a few examples. The first two are from Karen Bennett. The third is mine, so if it's no good, let me know. So the first example is the fact that there is some hydrogen atom in Phoenix seems more fundamental than the fact that there is some water molecule in Ithaca, even though this hydrogen atom over there doesn't do any work in making it the case that water molecule exists. It's still more fundamental than, probably because just water molecules are generally grounded by hydrogen atoms. The second example, facts about potassium atoms seem more fundamental than facts about water molecule, or the same kind of example, facts about potassium atoms seem more fundamental than facts about peanut butter sandwiches. And that's the case even though potassium atoms never help making the case that some water molecule exists or that some peanut butter sandwich exists. But it's because, generally speaking, facts about molecule and facts about sandwiches or just regular everyday objects are grounded in facts about atoms. So this is even more general. And then there's a third kind of example. The fact that Bruce Lee was born in California is more fundamental than the fact that Bruce Willis is an American. And even though the fact that Bruce Willis is an American is not grounded in the place he was born, since he was not born in the US, being the place of birth can ground facts about American nationality. So therefore, facts about American nationality or facts about Russian nationality in general are grounded in facts about are less fundamental than facts about places of birth. Sorry. So in these cases, relative fundamentality is due to the kind of facts involved and the typical grounding relation that holds or that can hold between these kinds of facts. I'm going to say just one thing about equifundamentality, just because it's going to be relevant later on. So two facts are equifundamental, so they're the same at the same level, so to speak. If and only if any fact that is more fundamental than one is also more fundamental than the other, and any fact that is less fundamental than the one is less fundamental than the other. I take this definition from Karen Bennett. Now, this general picture of a layered structure often also comes with another assumption, but it can come with another assumption that there are at least some grounding chains terminate. So there are ungrounded facts, and if there are such ungrounded facts, then I'll call those the bedrock of reality. That's what I call the bedrock of reality. That's what I call absolutely fundamental stuff. And this, it should be really clear that this is a sense of absolute fundamentality that I'm using here. There are other notions of absolute fundamentality, and I'm just setting them aside for the purpose of this talk. There's another common assumption about the bedrock, which is not necessary at all, but it often comes along, and that's completeness, which is the idea that the ungrounded facts ground everything else. So basically, there are no all grounding chains terminate somewhere. Now, if we take on board this assumption, this is just helpful to get a nice metaphoric picture of the metaphysical bedrock, and that's the metaphor of God, which is that the bedrock of reality, assuming it's complete, consists of whatever would be sufficient for God to create in order to give rise to the rest of reality from the ground up. Okay. Now, given this framework, it is increasingly common to construe the debate between naturalists and non-naturalists as a disagreement about what constitutes the bedrock of reality. According to naturalism, all fundamental facts are natural facts, and non-naturalism just says that naturalism is false. Now, specifically, moral non-naturalism, as I understand it here, is the view that there are fundamental moral facts, and these facts are not natural facts. Typically, it also adds this third assumption, but that doesn't do much work, doesn't really matter for my purposes here. So what are the fundamental moral facts? According to the most common version of moral non-naturalism, the most fundamental moral facts are moral principles. Which moral principles? It depends what your moral theory is. If you're, you can be a monist and believe that there is just one fundamental moral fact, and let's say utilitarianism, or you can be a pluralist Rawlsian and believe that there are 7 fundamental moral principles, or any other number of moral principles that are fundamental. Now, how exactly to analyze those moral principles? I don't think that matters for my purposes, but it might matter. So let me know if you think it does. But I'm, again, setting this aside. So I'll call this view generalist moral non-naturalism. And now we can present our thesis again. And the thesis is as follows: that generalist moral non-naturalism is at odds with 3 widespread assumptions about the metaphysical bedrock. And hopefully now you understand what I mean by moral non-naturalism, specifically generalist non-naturalism, and what I mean by the metaphysical bedrock. I'll say that I think that non-generalist versions of moral non-naturalism are similarly at odds with these assumptions. But but I'm not going to discuss them here. So the three assumptions are as follows: purity. Purity is the principle according to which no fundamental facts contain a derivative entity as a constituent. Free model recombination is the claim that any way each of the fundamental facts can be individually is a way they can be collectively. And what I call flatness, I coined this term, so I hope it works, is the claim that all ungrounded facts are equally fundamental and more fundamental than any ungrounded fact. Okay, so let's start with purity. So again, purity is the claim that no fundamental fact contains a derivative entity as a constituent. And there are 2 kinds of intuitive appeals to this principle. The first kind of assumes completeness, and that's the quote from Sider that I present here. When God was creating the world, she was not required to think in terms of non-fundamental notions like city, smile, or candy. Just the idea that whatever God needed in order to create the world had to already not to be something that's built, but something that's like at the foundation. Another kind of appeal that sometimes can be found in the literature is just that this is a very plausible or reasonable way to define what fundamental entities are. So I presented a definition of fundamental facts, but what are fundamental entities? We can just say that fundamental entities are whatever is in fundamental facts. So this is the quote from Rosen. A fact is fundamental or brute if it does not obtain in virtue of other facts. And a thing is fundamental if it is a constituent of a fundamental fact. So that's just very plausible to define fundamental entities in this way. So I want to argue that generalist moral non-naturalism contradicts purity. So why is that? Think about what are our moral principles. So the best candidates to be fundamental moral principles, they include things that are clearly non-fundamental properties. Properties like lying, keeping promises, causing pain, maximizing utilities, and those things are typically ascribed to clearly non-fundamental things like objects, persons, and things like that. So, for example, the principle of utility, which is a very strong candidate to be the fundamental moral principle. It attributes necessarily to actions that maximize happiness. Maximizing happiness, I'm thinking, is a non-fundamental, non-moral property, the moral property of being required. Or the principle of fidelity, to take on the Rossian kind of views. It attributes necessarily to actions of breaking a promise. Again, breaking a promise, an action of breaking a promise is a non-fundamental. Breaking a promise is a non-fundamental property, and the fact that something breaks a promise is a non-fundamental fact. So they attribute to those moral properties of being prima facie wrong. So yeah, I set aside that there might be some fringe views according to which some of these properties are fundamental. So maybe pain is fundamental or something like that. But those are fringe views, and second, it doesn't. A moral non-naturalist doesn't have to accept those views, and again, even if I think it can perhaps be said about certain properties that they are fundamental, but it's harder to say that the things to which we ascribe them are non-fundamental. I'm not sure about that, but so it's harder. I don't think there are views that say that actions are fundamental. Maybe persons are, but actions not. Okay, moving on to so that's why moral non-naturalism contradicts purity. Moving on to free model recombination. So free model recombination is the claim that the fundamental, actual, concrete elements of reality must be open to free model recombination. And what does it mean to be open to free model recombination? This is the quote from Scheffer. A plurality of entities is freely recombinable if and only if any combination of ways that each entity can be individually is a way that the plurality can be collectively. So A and B are freely recombinable if any way that A can be and any way that B can be, they can be together or separately or independently from what the other is. Applied to fundamental facts, this means that fundamental facts are distinct such that any way each of them can be individually, including not existing or necessarily existing, is a way they can be collectively. And now the intuitive appeal behind this principle is that, as Wang puts it, whatever is fundamental is self-sufficient or need not look outside itself. So if something is fundamental, it should be independent, basically. That's the idea. Maybe the thought is that if it's dependent, then it's not fundamental or something like that. Now here my claim is not so strong. I don't think that generalist moral non-naturalism contradicts free model recombination, but I think there is a tension between generalist moral non-naturalism and free model recombination. So why is that? If some moral principles are fundamental facts and fundamental facts are freely modally recombinable, then there can be a world with precisely the same non-moral fundamental facts, but where there are different fundamental moral principles or no moral principles at all. So for example, there can be a world where there are sentient beings, but where sadistically torturing innocent people is actually good. Now this is a very counterintuitive and almost really outrageous result. Sometimes moral non-naturalists bite the bullet. Other times they try to say that there is some kind of necessity here. But an interesting aspect is that it can be avoided simply by denying the free model recombination of fundamental facts. So if we deny free model recombination, we can say that some moral principles are fundamental, meaning they are ungrounded, but these moral principles are not freely recombinable with just any non-moral fundamental facts. So the fact that there are sentient beings is not freely recombinable with any moral principle at all. Any world where there are sentient beings is a world where torturing the innocent is wrong. Yeah, so again, it's not like a contradiction, but there is some tension, and the moral non-naturalist has some reason to reject free moral recombination in order to avoid the outrageous and counterintuitive result. Moving on to flatness now. So this is one that I struggled with the most. So David already read an earlier version of this paper. This wasn't in the version that you read. The intuitive idea, I think it can be cashed out by means of the following principle, which is all ungrounded facts are equifundamental. Now, if you remember the definition of equifundamentality, this means that any fact that is more fundamental than one ungrounded fact is also more fundamental than any other fundamental fact, and any fact that is less fundamental than one is also less fundamental than the other. Or put differently, all ungrounded facts are more fundamental than all grounded facts. No. Yes. So the claim that metaphysical bedrock is flat is the claim that every pair of facts of which at least one is ungrounded are comparable. So this pair of facts is comparable with respect to relative fundamentality. All ungrounded facts are on a par. They're all like at the lower level, and they are all more fundamental than all other, and than the grounded facts. And Bennett is the only philosopher I saw who actually states this explicitly, and she says it's so plausible it's arguably analytic. Now, the intuitive appeal is, I think, is that if something is the most fundamental, how can anything be more fundamental than the most fundamental? It almost seems analytic, but I want to argue. Wait, is it stuck? Okay, I want to argue that generalist moral non-naturalism is plausibly a counterexample to flatness. So remember that absolute fundamentality was simply defined as ungroundedness, but relative fundamentality can also apply across grounding chains. We saw that facts about atoms are ground facts about molecules, and so any atom is more fundamental than any molecule. And we saw that facts about place of birth can ground American nationality, and so facts about place of birth are more fundamental than facts about nationality. So in general, if facts of kind A typically or generally can ground facts of kind B, then any fact of kind A is more fundamental than any fact of kind B, even though there is no grounding chain connecting the two. And given this standard for relative fundamentality, it's plausible to view moral principles as counterexamples to flatness. So here's the argument. Moral principles are moral facts. They are the fundamental moral facts. Generally speaking, or typically, moral facts are grounded by natural facts, and therefore, moral principles, even if they're ungrounded, are less fundamental than natural facts by virtue of being moral facts. So this is not the only kind of counterexample. Maybe in the Q&A I'll present. There's Bennett herself suggests a different kind of counterexample. And what she says is that the similar cases, but it should be true also for moral principles, are not counterexamples to flatness, but exceptions to the standard of relative fundamentality across grounding chains, so that if one of the facts is ungrounded, then this standard doesn't apply. And my response to this is to say that the only reason to make this exception is the supposed plausibility or analyticity of flatness, but there are good reasons to doubt this analyticity. So again, the intuitive appeal for flatness was how could this be possible even to think of something that's more fundamental than the most fundamental? But there's a simple answer to that, right? The standard for absolute fundamentality and the standard for relative fundamentality just come apart. Absolute fundamentality is relative only to a given grounding chain, but relative fundamentality can apply across grounding chains. And two useful metaphors in this context. First, we can think about the geological metaphor of the bedrock itself. So the bedrock in location A might be lower down than the bedrock in location B. It's the most fundamental here, and it's the most fundamental there, and still here it's lower down than here. And there's no puzzle here. There's no problem. And similarly with causation, if uncaused events are possible at all, then there shouldn't be anything special with the Big Bang or the first uncaused event. Uncaused events could happen at any point in time. It could just, if an uncaused event happened right now, it would not be co-temporal with the first, with the Big Bang. And this is very interesting with respect to Bennett specifically, because she believes that fundamentality is should be understood like as a building relation, and she includes in building also causation. So the objection from causation is strong. Is stronger against her view. But even if you don't take causation to be a fundamentality relation, I think the analogy still shows that it breaks down the intuitive appeal of flatness, or at least the claim that it's practically analytical. So to recap, I argued that generalist moral non-naturalism contradicts purity, that it's in tension with free model recombination, and it plausibly constitutes a counterexample to flatness. So generalist moral non-naturalism, generalist moral non-naturalists have ample reason to reject these metaphysical principles. Okay, but what about everyone else? Not everyone is moral non-naturalist. I think there's plausibly an ecumenicality or neutrality constraint on theorizing about the nature of metaphysical structure. So as Wilson writes, any reasonable account of metaphysical structure should not be biased towards one metaphysical view rather than any other. It should not settle as a matter of definition an issue which we are inclined to regard as a matter of substance. So whether or not purity, free model recombination, or flatness are correct is a substantive metaphysical question, and it should not be settled as a matter of definition or as a necessary metaphysical starting point that's biased against moral non-naturalism, but should at least be argued for. And